Hello, Vikings. I am so excited to be here with you today to share your virtual cruise of the Mediterranean. I'm Russell Lee, and I'm one of your Viking enrichment lecturers. Now, I like to use a lot of storytelling and humor in my lectures, and today I've got some great stories to share with you. We're going to be talking about Greek mythology. This is a lecture you might hear on an itinerary such as Mediterranean Odyssey or Empires of the Mediterranean. Now, before we start, I do have a couple of housekeeping items for you. Number one, I love to have an interactive lecture. So you'll notice if you're watching this live, on the right side of your screen, there's an area where you can ask questions. You're certainly willing to submit questions here, but you can also, as I go through my lecture, submit comments, criticisms, corrections, general reactions. There's about a 30-second delay between the time that you submit and I see it. So what I'll do is at a couple of points during my lecture, I'll pause and check in and see what you've got to say. But I can't tell you how helpful it is to know there's somebody out there as I'm sitting here alone babbling out into cyberspace, okay? The second housekeeping item is that today's lecture may not be adults only, but it is definitely rated PG. Some of these stories do get a little bit salty, okay? So if you've got little ones with you, you may want to distract them with something else or be prepared to answer a lot of interesting questions. So with that, I am pleased to present Gods, Heroes, and Monsters, Thrilling Tales from Greek Mythology. I've got my official Serrano clicker here, so let's get started. I'm going to begin with a quote from Stephen Hawking, the famous astrophysicist. What did he say? He said, "Remember to look up at the stars, not down at your feet. Try to make sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. In short, be curious." And for thousands and thousands of years, humans have been curious looking up at the stars. The looking up at the stars at night and the sense of wonder and infinity has made them ask a lot of fundamental questions about life, including, how did all of this get here? And just as they looked at the stars and saw these questions, they looked at the same stars for answers. They would start to see shapes in the stars, and those stars would become pictures. Those pictures would become stories. And pretty soon, the night sky was filled with these stories that all related to each other and became what we know as mythology. And today I'm going to be sharing some of the mythology invented by the Greeks. There are many, many different versions of these stories. You may have heard them differently than I did, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'll just share today the versions I've heard, and we can compare notes later someday when we're in the Explorer's Lounge. All right, so at the very, very beginning of time, there was nothing. And out of that nothing, there arose the very first being. Her name was Chaos, which means the abyss. And along with her, there were some other beings that came around. There was Gaia, Mother Earth. There was Tartarus, god of the underworld. And there was Eros, the god of love. Now together, these four beings that came out of nothingness were called the primordial deities because they just came into being and existed. Now, Chaos and Gaia craved male companionship, but they wanted nothing to do with Tartarus. So they were very, very happy when Eros showed up. So what you have here is you have nothingness, you have life, you have death, and you have purpose, which of course is love. And given that Eros was love, it was just a matter of time before these primordial deities started hooking up with each other. First, you had Chaos hooking up with Eros. And out of their union came a couple of children. The first was Erebus, the darkness. The second was Nyx, the night, male and female. And again, Nyx craved male companionship, but nobody wanted anything to do with her because she was so dark, except for her own brother, Erebus. So Nyx and Erebus coupled up together, and out of their union came again a couple of offspring. You had Ether, the light, and you had Hemera, the day. So just as happened in a lot of other mythologies from other cultures, you have light coming out of darkness, and you have day coming out of night. And still, Nyx craved more offspring and more children, but nobody would pair up with her. And so she spontaneously gave birth to this whole family of gods and qualities that you normally associate with night. Everything from sleep to dreams, etc. Okay? But getting back to our original 4 primordial deities, we talked about how Chaos and Eros hooked up. Now it was time for Gaia, Mother Earth, and Eros to hook up. And out of their union again came another offspring. And this offspring was Uranus, Father Sky. Now, if you're paying close attention, you can imagine that with names like Mother Earth and Father Sky, well, it's only a matter of time before they hook up, even though Gaia was basically Uranus's mother. Now, there is an old saying that you should not hook up with too close of a family member, because with a limited gene pool, funny things start to happen with your offspring. And in our story, this is about the time when that happened. So Gaia and Uranus gave birth to bouncing baby hecaton cherries, or 100-handed ones. And here's a close-up picture of them. Now, if you're Uranus and you're looking at these babies, one thought comes to your mind. Oh boy. And so he did what any normal father in his situation would do. He took those babies and he stuffed them right back up into Gaia's womb. Well, Gaia and Uranus decided to try again, okay? Is second time the charm? Well, you tell me. Their second set of offsprings were the Cyclops, or round eyes. And again, here's what they look like close up. Well, Uranus took one look at his second offspring, the Cyclops, and he took one look at Gaia, and Gaia said, "Don't you even think about it." So Uranus did the next best thing. He took those babies and he just sent them down with Uncle Tartarus down to the underworld, where he hoped to never see them again. Well, Gaia and Uranus decided to give it one more try. You know what they say, third time's the charm, right? So this time, who did they give birth to? They gave birth to 12 of the most beautiful, beautiful babies you've ever seen. These babies, you'll see their names here. Some of their names may be familiar to you. They were collectively called the Titans. Okay, you see them here, Hyperion, you see Iapetus, Kronos, etc. Now, do not let this family picture fool you. Everybody's smiling. Uranus looks like he's got his arms around everybody. If you've ever had your family photo taken at Sears, you know the real story behind the story. You pile up everybody in the station wagon. They're arguing and screaming and kicking and fighting with each other. You drag them down to Sears and you say, "Smile or else," and the photographer captures the one split second where everybody's not making a funny face. That's this photo. Everything looks fine, but as you've heard by now, Uranus was a terrible husband. He was a terrible father. And by now, Gaia was getting tired of having babies shoved up into her lady bits and babies shoved down into hell. So she asked her children, "I want to get rid of your father. Who's in to help me?" And all of her children became deathly afraid. They all decided it was their turn to feed the cat that day. There was only one of her children who offered to help her do away with Uranus, and that was one of her sons, Kronos. So what did Kronos do? Well, here's the time to hang on to your seat. Kronos took a diamond sickle, and while his father Uranus was sleeping, he went in and he gave a few whacks. I know, ouch, right? So out of the blood that flowed out of Uranus, there were even more offspring that came out. You had the giants, you had the ash tree nymphs, and you had the Furies. And then Kronos took his father's manhood and cast it into the sea. And out of that foam arose the most beautiful creature you have ever seen on earth. That creature's name was Aphrodite. You may know her by her Roman name, Venus. In fact, what you're looking at right now is Botticelli's famous painting, The Birth of Venus. And I apologize because you will never look at this painting the same way, because down at her feet, what you're actually looking at is her rising out of the remains of Uranus's gonads. But I digress. Let's get back to our story. So Uranus was going to be no more. With his dying breath, he cursed his son Cronus, and he said, "Just as my offspring has been the doom of me, so shall your offspring be the doom of you." And that was the last we saw of Uranus. So we now turn our story over to Cronus. Cronus took very much to heart the curse that his father laid on him, and he said, "I am not going to repeat the sins of my father." For instance, he decided not to hook up with Gaia, his own mother, who, by the way, was also his grandmother. Of course not. Cronus was smarter than that. Who did he hook up with? He hooked up with his sister, Rhea. And out of their union, they very soon had their own bouncing baby. And again, Cronus said, "I'm not going to repeat the sins of my father. I'm not going to stuff this baby back up into Rhea's womb. I'm not going to send this baby down to Tartarus in the underworld." Of course not. He was smarter than that. What did Cronus do? Well, he ate that baby. And so we enter the part of our story where Rhea kept popping out babies and Cronus kept eating them. Needless to say, Rhea was starting to get rather discouraged by this. So by the time she got to her sixth little baby, she decided to play a trick on her husband. What Rhea did is she took a stone, wrapped that up in swaddling blankets, and said, "Look, Cronus, look at our new darling baby. Isn't he wonderful?" And Cronus said, "Yes, he is," and promptly ate him, not realizing that he was eating a rock. And what this allowed Rhea to do was to raise her only surviving baby in secret, away from Kronos and the danger of Kronos. That baby was named Zeus, which is literally Greek for God. And so Zeus was able to grow up in secret out of the dangerous eye of his father Cronus and reach adulthood. Now, once Zeus reached adulthood, he realized that he couldn't keep hiding from his father Cronus forever, but what to do about it. So he consulted the goddess Metis, the goddess of wisdom, and said, "How can I fix this and do away with my father?" And Metis devised a cunning plan for Zeus. What she did is she created a drink that looked exactly like Cronus's favorite drink, but it was actually something that was going to make him violently ill. And so Zeus, disguised as a cupbearer, served this drink to his father. And what did Cronus do? Cronus immediately started getting the heaves, and he threw up all the babies that he had swallowed before. And you can see here the names of those babies. Again, very, very familiar. Goddess of the hearth, goddess of grain and agriculture, all of Zeus's 5 older brothers and sisters. In fact, Cronus even threw up that goofy rock that he'd accidentally swallowed, and the rock became the basis for another Greek myth. That rock's name is Omphalos, which is Greek for navel. And that rock would become the foundation of the famous Oracle of Delphi, the oracle who was able to predict the future and interpret prophecies. So now you know that the Oracle of Delphi actually came from the rock that Cronus swallowed. But again, I digress. Let's get back to our story. So at this point, it was all-out war between Zeus the son and Cronus his father. And Zeus had on his side, he had his brothers and sisters who had just been regurgitated. Cronus had on his side all his brothers and sisters from that family portrait who were the Titans. The result was a massive 10-year war. This war was called the Titanomachy. And Zeus, needless to say, being younger, was vastly, vastly outnumbered. But he had a few secrets up his sleeve. He went back into Gaia's womb and he pulled back out the Hecaton cherries to fight on his side of the army. And the Hecaton cherries were very successful because they were able to ambush the Titans. But Zeus did not stop there. He also went down into the underworld and he pulled out those Cyclops round eyes. And the Cyclops, being master blacksmiths and forgers, were able to create some great weapons for Zeus's army. They created lightning bolts for Zeus to use as a weapon, and they created a trident for Zeus's brother Poseidon to use as a weapon. And thanks to all these secret armed forces and these secret weapons, Zeus was able to win the Titanomachy and overcome his own father Cronus. And so at the end of this battle, all the Titans were consigned down into the land of Tartarus in the underworld, where they were guarded by none other than the Hecatoncheires. Cronus the father as well was consigned down in the underworld for prison for all time. But his legend does live on. If you know your Greek, you know that Cronus is actually Greek for the word time. And Cronus lives on in modern times as the image of Father Time. In one hand, he holds the hourglass, but in the other hand, he's still holding that diamond sickle, which we know it was used for. So now again, at this point in time, you've got another image that unfortunately you will never be able to look at the same way again. But in the meantime, back to our story, there was a new sheriff in town, and that was Zeus and all of his family. They became the ruling gods. They became known as the Olympians. So at this point in my story, let me take a little bit of a pause, just check in with your comments and see if there's anything I need to address before we go on to the story. So let's check this out. Okay, we've got some comments coming in that I will address later during the Q&A. Diane, thank you. She says, I love your presentation. Let's see. Okay, Robert asks, what in ancient Greek mythology survives today as a current belief or folklore? Well, I just gave you one example of that. Father Time is actually based on Cronus, and I'll refer to some more later as we share some more myths. Okay, here we have a comment. Are there cruises that offer these little history lessons in combination with tours? Well, I'm not sure quite how to interpret your question, Carolee, but if you're talking about cruises, every Viking cruise has lecturers like me on board. In fact, they have a whole set of about 4 or 5 lecturers who will give destination-specific lectures, specifically about the places that you're going to. So if you're going to Greece, you will have lectures about Greece, such as this one on Greek mythology, that are specifically designed to help you understand your destination better. If you're talking about tours, yes, absolutely, there are some tours that will have little talks like this, even on the bus ride over to your destination or with guided tours, who will share these wonderful little stories to help enhance your tour and your overall cruise. As Tor likes to say, Viking is the thinking person's cruise. And this whole program on Viking.TV is just proof of that. Okay, so let's go back into our lecture and pick up where we left off. Glasses off. Okay, back to the clicker. So, we last left with the Olympians in charge. Let me pause here and give a little bit of background on some of these myths. There is a huge, huge, complicated family tree about these myths. And that's because everybody's hooking up with their mother, their father, their son, their daughter, their brother, and their sister. It is a very, very convoluted history, which again is why I said that you may have heard different versions of these stories than I did. So how do we know about these Greek myths? Well, unfortunately, there is no single source. There are multiple sources, and many of them contradict each other. The most famous source is probably the works of this gentleman, Homer. He wrote some ancient poems called the Iliad and the Odyssey, which mention a lot of these gods and myths. And the trouble is that because Homer was talking to a familiar audience, he didn't fully explain these myths. He assumed that people knew who Zeus was. So he had mentioned, yeah, Zeus cast down a lightning bolt, etc. And people would be expected to know that Zeus was the god of thunder and had lightning bolts. It wasn't until 100 years later with this gentleman, Hesiod, who wrote 2 works called Theogony and Works and Days. Hesiod was the first historian who tried making sense of all these disparate myths and tried sorting out the contradictions and putting them together into some kind of logical order. And Works and Days was an application of that to how to live your daily life in reference to the gods. Several hundred years later, a third source was this gentleman, Apollodorus. He wrote the Library of Mythology, in which it is tried to actually catalog and write a reference work for Greek mythology. The trouble is that we know that Apollodorus lived somewhere around 100 to 200 years common era, and yet there are references in his work that actually refer to events that happened after he supposedly died. So we're not quite sure whether Apollodorus really wrote this book or not. which is why if you check it out of the library, look it up on Amazon, you'll see that it's actually authored by pseudo-Apollodorus. That's what that's referring to. Okay, so now let's get back to our wonderful mythology stories and do some more storytelling. As I mentioned, the Greeks looked up at the sky and they asked the question, how did all of this get here? And they made up myths in order to answer those questions. The second question that came to mind is this question. Why are things the way they are? Why do good things happen? Why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? Is there something that is a master plan that is behind all of this? And again, the Greeks used myths and storytelling to try to answer that question. So let's pick back up where we left off. We have Zeus, who is now the new king in town. And so he and his two brothers, Poseidon and Hades, decided to draw lots to see who would get to rule what. Unfortunately, the sisters were left out of this. I'm sorry, I just tell the stories, I don't make them up. So Zeus, he won the drawing. Big surprise, right? So he became the ruler of the sky, the mortals, and the gods. His brother Poseidon, with his trident, got to become ruler of the seas. And unfortunately, his third brother, Hades, well, he lost the drawing, drew the short straw, and so he ended up with the dregs. He got to take over from his uncle Tartarus as ruler of the underworld. Okay, so let's go back and rejoin our friend Zeus as he is now ruling over the land and the earth. Again, he was determined not to repeat the mistakes of his own parents and hook up with his own mother or anything like that. Of course not. No, he hooked up with his sister, Hera. Okay, so when you look at the Olympians in this picture, who do you have here? You have Zeus and Hera. You have Zeus's brother, Poseidon. Brother Hades didn't get to be up with the Olympians because he was down in Hades. You have Aphrodite, the most beautiful creature ever born, who was born out of Uranus's severed gonads. You have a couple of the Titans who fought on the side of the Olympians, and so Zeus allowed them to rule up in Olympia with him. Those are Demeter and Hestia. You have the two children who were the children of Zeus and Hera. And then you have a whole bunch of children that Zeus had with other goddesses who were not his own wife. Apologies for that. He just wanted them by his side. As for the Titans, the leader of the Titan army that lost against the Olympians was Atlas. So Zeus cursed Atlas to an eternal punishment of having to support the weight of the world on his shoulders for all time. And there is a legend that Atlas was there so long sitting still that he actually turned to stone and became the Atlas Mountains in the north of Africa. There were a few Titans who Zeus decided to spare the lives of. There was Themis, the goddess of justice, who again betrayed her own people, fought on the side of the Olympians. And there were a couple of sons of the Titan Iapetus, who were Prometheus and Epimetheus, who Zeus also decided to spare. Now, Zeus at this time was thinking, you know, it's a shame that we never made any creatures on Earth who are in the likeness of gods. That'd be pretty amusing to do that and see what they're up to. And so he set Prometheus and Epimetheus to this task. He said to Prometheus, Prometheus, I want you to create a creature that looks like the gods. And so Prometheus created man. And not only did Prometheus create man, but Athena imparted on man intelligence. So man had the gift of speech and was intelligent beyond the gods. And then Zeus came back to Prometheus and Epimetheus and said, okay, now I got a great project for you. I want you to take all the creatures of the earth and just give them different qualities to make them unique. And so Prometheus said, Epimetheus, you're my brother, you go first. Go ahead and give any qualities you want to all the animals of the earth. And so Epimetheus did that. He gave, for instance, courage to the lion. He gave meekness to the lamb. He gave great beauty to Finsa. He gave great kindness to Charlie. And he gave all these great qualities to all the creatures of the earth. But there was one problem. After he was done, it came to Prometheus to give great qualities to man. And unfortunately, all the great qualities were taken. Prometheus had nothing to give as a gift to man. So at this point in the story, he did something that was very, very askance and debatable. He went up to his uncle Hephaestus while Hephaestus was sleeping and he stole one of Hephaestus's creations. This was the creation of fire. And Prometheus gave this forbidden gift of fire to man as his gift of man, as his gift to man. And this is how man gained fire, a power of the gods. Well, needless to say, this did not go well on Mount Olympus. Zeus was absolutely furious because fire was a gift of the gods, not man. And Zeus decided to punish both Prometheus and man. What was his punishment for Prometheus? He took Prometheus and he had him put in chains. But that's not all. He had Prometheus in chains strapped to the side of a mountain. But wait, there's more. This wasn't just any mountain. This mountain was Mount Caucasus, the farthest mountain on the edge of the world, which nobody ever went to. But wait, you ask, is there even more? Yes, there is. In addition to this, Zeus sent an eagle to peck at Prometheus's liver every day. Now, if you know your biology or anatomy, you know that the liver is the only solid organ in the body that can regenerate itself. So the curse that Prometheus had was that he would have his liver pecked out by an eagle all day long. It would grow back at night, and the eagle would come back the next day. Prometheus, being a god, was immortal, and so he was in excruciating pain for all of eternity, howling to the wind at the farthest reaches of the earth where nobody could hear him. Pretty bad, huh, right? Well, wait till you hear the punishment that Zeus had for man. Zeus set Hephaestus to create another version of man, of unsurpassed beauty, a female version of man. And he gave to this female the qualities of cunning and the qualities of deceit. Again, my apologies. I don't make these stories up. I just report them. And then Zeus gave this female two more qualities. He gave her insatiable curiosity, and he gave her a box that she was forbidden to open. If you haven't guessed right now, this female creature was named Pandora. What you may not know is that she was the very first female created. And then Zeus did the most diabolical thing of all. He sent Pandora down to earth. Now, Prometheus, before he was shackled in chains and sent away to the eagle, had warned his brother Epimetheus, if Zeus gives you a gift, do not accept it. Zeus is not your friend. And Epimetheus said, yeah, check, got that. But once Prometheus was gone, and Epimetheus laid eyes on Pandora, he said, I must have you for my wife. And he invited her down to earth. He invited her down to his home, and that's how Pandora came to earth. Now, needless to say, one day, Pandora's curiosity got the better of her, and she took this box that she was told, never open, and she opened it. Well, what happened? Immediately out of this box came every curse known to mankind, every sin from greed and envy to poverty and war. This is known as the story of Pandora's box. And this is how all the evils came to earth. Needless to say, Pandora tried closing that box, but it was too late. All the evil had escaped. And so there was one thing left, the very, very last creature in quality to emerge from that box at the very end. That was called hope. And that is the saving grace of mankind. And so now you know why mankind has all these evils, and you know why hope is still there, and you know why hope is the last thing that comes to our mind when things are going badly. Very, very sad, right? Amazingly enough, you can find very, very similar archetypes in, for instance, Judeo-Christian mythology, where supposedly sin was introduced by Eve, the first woman. Sin is introduced by Pandora, the first woman here. Again, all I can say is these stories were probably written by men. My apologies. Women, please go out and write a great mythology that ennobles women as they deserve to be. Okay, again, this is a very good point in my story to just take a very, very short pause. Let me just check in and make sure that there are no comments coming in that I need to address right away. Okay, so what do we have here? Okay, so thank you, all of you. I'm seeing some great comments here about how much you're enjoying the lecture. I don't see anything that I need to address before the Q&A. So what I will do then is I will come back to our lecture and see where we left off. Okay, so as we left off with Pandora and Hope, that helps to answer the question that the Greeks asked, why are things the way they are? And quite bluntly, the answer is because we Greeks are ruled over by a bunch of gods who are petty, immature, vindictive, and moody. And again, for those of us who come from a different background, such as Judeo-Christian mythology, this is probably a very foreign concept to imagine that what you have in Greece are gods who happen to be immortal, but they are certainly not divine. They are not necessarily above us or better than us. In fact, in Greek mythology, the gods have human emotions, flaws, and failings. As you've heard from my story, they indulge in frequent infidelity and incest, and they constantly meddle in human affairs. Fortunately, the gods do have a sense of ethics, which is why things are the way they are. In other words, you have your fundamental concepts of love and war, and you have the concepts that good is rewarded while bad is punished. If it weren't for that, civilization would descend into chaos. And another huge factor that you're hearing in these Greek stories is the concept of fate, that what happens to you may be determined beyond your control. But what's very interesting is that these prophecies apply not only to humans, men and women, but they also apply to the gods. The gods are just as subject to these prophecies and fate as we humans are. Okay, so we've talked about how mythology answers two fundamental questions. How did all of this get here? And why are things the way they are? There is actually a third source of myths that has nothing to do with these two, and I refer to that as when heroes become legends. This is the way it works. Keep in mind that during this time you have a lot of oral storytelling that goes on from generation to generation, parents to children. And so you may have had a true historical story of a hero who defeated a bad guy. As it gets passed down, that bad guy becomes 10 bad guys. The hero defended 10 bad guys. And then the next iteration is the hero defended 10 giants. And then it becomes the hero defended 10 giants with a magic spear that he got from the gods. And so in this way, history slowly becomes legend, and legend slowly becomes myth. And so what I'd like to do now is start sharing some stories that come out of this hero aspect. And we're going to start with our old friend Prometheus. Anybody remember Prometheus? Guy chained to a rock on the farthest reaches of Earth, getting his liver picked out by an eagle every day, goes back every night. That Prometheus. Prometheus was in agonizing pain, and he begged and begged to be released from his punishment. You know, all he did was give fire to humans, right? So Zeus said, okay, there is a way you can get out of this, but two things have to happen. Okay, number one, somebody must kill the eagle. And keep in mind, there is nobody else there. But even worse, number two, somebody must take Prometheus's place. Zeus says, if those two things can happen, Prometheus, you can go free. And Prometheus kind of went, oh darn, here comes another day of eagle. So Zeus gave him a second plan, or Prometheus, you can reveal the prophecy. Okay, what prophecy are we talking about here? Well, let's back up, okay? As I mentioned, Zeus hooked up with his own sister Hera. They had a couple of children. But Zeus, as king of the gods, had a lot of power, and so he was quite a ladies' man. He was always fooling around on the side. And not only was he always fooling around on the side, but he was always doing goofy disguises. I don't know why, maybe he just liked disguises. For instance, a few highlights. He disguised himself as a swan to seduce Leda. He disguised himself as an eagle to seduce Ganymede. Disguised himself as a bull to seduce Europa. And he disguised himself as some kind of smoke monster to seduce Io. I don't know, I guess during the pandemic, he like binge lost or something. But anyway, he was constantly disguising himself in order to seduce these goddesses who were not his wife. And so this prophecy came about that Zeus became very scared of. What was this prophecy? The sea goddess should bear a princely son, stronger than his father, who would wield another weapon in his hand more powerful than the thunderbolt or the irresistible trident. Okay, this is the part of the prophecy that made Zeus very scared, that the sea goddess should bear a princely son stronger than his father. Now, as you recall, Zeus has something of a family curse here. He overthrew his own father, and his father Kronos overthrew his own father Uranus. And Zeus said, I cannot let that happen to me. I cannot have a son who is stronger than me. I must make sure that this never happens. Note to self, do not hook up with this sea goddess. The trouble was that there was a whole lot of sea goddesses around, and this prophecy does not tell Zeus which sea goddess he is not to hook up with. He desperately, desperately needed the name of that sea goddess. So if we revisit his deal with Prometheus, he said, Prometheus, who had the gift of prophecy, reveal to me who the sea goddess is, and I will let you go free. And Prometheus said, no, I want to see you suffer. And so Zeus said, fine, I'm going to see you suffer. Because Zeus had another way out. You will recall that one of the titans he spared was Themis, the goddess of justice. Well, it so happens that Themis also had the gift of prophecy. And as a reward to Zeus for not throwing her into the underworld, she revealed the prophecy. She said the son of Thetis would become stronger, greater than his father. And so Zeus now had the name. Thetis was the sea goddess he should not hook up with. And as it turned out, this answer came just in time, because wouldn't you know it, Zeus was just about to go to bed with Thetis. And he said, no, stop, dead stop, put a stop to that. Zeus said, let Thetis accept a mortal's bed, not a god's bed, so that she can see her son die in battle. I need her son to be mortal, not immortal. A son who was like Ares in the strength of his hands, and not like the lightning in the swift prime of his feet. In other words, let her have a human son who will die and not challenge me. And so he and the gods got together, and they took Thetis, and they paired her up with this gentleman, Peleus, one of the mortal kings. He was very nice, he was very noble, but he was mortal. And so Thetis and Peleus did indeed have a son who was half immortal because Thetis was a goddess, and half mortal because Peleus was a man, and so this son would die. And this son, again, did become a truly, truly strong and powerful man, but he was still a man, and his name was Achilles. Now, Thetis was still very, very sad and afraid of one day seeing her son Achilles have to die because he was mortal. So she tried to do everything she could. She took this newborn baby, she took him down to Hades and the river Styx, and held the baby by the heel and dunked him into the river to make his skin invulnerable in the magic water. And this actually did work. Achilles became one of the greatest warriors that Greece has ever known. He became the hero of the Trojan War in the Iliad and ended up looking exactly like Brad Pitt. It's uncanny. But the doom of Achilles is that because he was being held by his heel, he had one little part of his body that was not invulnerable. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly where a poison arrow hit. And that was the death of Achilles. But strangely enough, Achilles is not the hero story that I want to tell today. I want to tell a different hero story. The whole purpose of this huge diversion was to tell you a story about how Zeus loved to disguise himself as other things in order to seduce women who weren't his wife. And so let's get back to the main story. Here we have a beautiful, beautiful woman. Her name is Alcmene. And here she is with her beautiful, beautiful husband, Amphitryon. Now, if you look very, very closely at this picture, you will see that there is something wrong with this picture. Yes, you guessed it. That is not really Amphitryon. That is Zeus in disguise, that wily, wily guy. Not only did Zeus seduce Alcmene, but he seduced her the same night she had relations with her husband Amphitryon. So guess what happens 9 months later? Alcmene gives birth to twin sons of different fathers. The son of Amphitryon, who is mortal, is named Iphicles. But the twin son is secretly the son of Zeus. So he is half man, half god. And his name is Heracles. Now, you may know Heracles by his more familiar Roman name, which is Hercules. But we're here in virtual Greece this week, so we're going to go with the Greek name Heracles. Heracles is the hero whose story I'm going to tell for the remainder of my time today. Well, Heracles made somebody very, very unhappy. And that somebody was Zeus's wife, Hera, who was absolutely furious. It was bad enough that their husband kept sleeping with other women who were goddesses who were not Hera, but now Zeus was even seducing mortal women. How low can you go? How wanted do you think that made Hera feel? So she wanted revenge. She wanted to get rid of this baby Heracles. So what did she do? She went to Alcmene's nursery, and while Alcmene was there with the babies, Hera sent a poisonous snake to kill them. Well, of course, Alcmene and Iphicles were scared to death, but Heracles killed the snake. So you can see this baby was destined for great things, even from infancy. And sure enough, Heracles grew up and became the strongest, the bravest, the most amazing warrior that Greece had known since Achilles. But Hera did not give up yet. She said, okay, I'm going to try something else. And so what she did is she made Heracles temporarily insane. And while Heracles was temporarily insane, he accidentally killed his own wife and his own children, slew his own family. And then Hera did the worst thing of all. She brought Heracles back to sanity. And when Heracles saw what he had done, he could not live with himself. He could not sleep. He could not do anything. He was so miserable. Heracles actually went to the Oracle of Delphi. You remember the oracle that was born out of a little rock called Omphalos. Heracles went to the Oracle of Delphi and said, please, Oracle, tell me what I can do to atone for this huge sin I've done. And the Oracle said, there is something you can do, Heracles. You can go and serve your cousin, Eurystheus, who is a king. You can serve him for 10 years, do whatever he says. If you do everything he says, then your sins will be forgiven and your conscience will be clear. And so Heracles did this. He served his cousin for 10 years. And as it happens, Eurystheus had several tasks they needed to accomplish in order to clean the world up from the Titanomachy and the old days of the Titans. And these were called the 12 labors or tasks of Heracles. You may know them as the 12 tasks of Hercules. Okay, so what were these tasks? I'm not going to go over them in great detail, but just so you know what they were. They were, number one, Heracles had to slay the Nemean lion. Number two, he had to slay the Lernaean hydra. Number three, he had to capture the Cyrenian hind. Number four, he had to capture the Erymanthian boar. Number five, something different for a change. He had to clean the Augean stables, but do it in one day. And I have to tell you, there are a whole lot of horses in those stables. Number six, he had to kill the Stymphalian birds. Number seven, capture the Cretan bull. Number eight, steal the mares of Diomedes. Number nine, steal the girdle of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. That's going to be a nifty trick, huh? And number 10, steal the cattle of the monster Geryon. 10 tasks, 10 amazing feats. It took Heracles 10 years to do that, but he finally did. At the end of 10 long years, he came back to Eurystheus and said, look, cousin, I did everything you asked. Are my sins now atoned? And his cousin said, well, yeah, you did a great job with those 10 tasks, but I noticed that for 2 of them, you got help from somebody else. You didn't do them by yourself. So, did I say 10 labors? No, I meant you have to do 12 labors. And she gave Heracles 2 more tasks to make up for the 2 that Heracles did not do by himself. So, task number 11, steal the golden apples of the Hesperides. And number 12, capture Cerberus, the guardian of the underworld, the 3-headed dog. Well, the happy ending to the story is that Heracles did do these other 2 tasks. And so for the 12 tasks of Hercules, he accomplished all of them, and his sins were forgiven. He had a clear conscience. But the part of the story that concerns me today is not these tasks, which I went over rather quickly, but what Heracles did on the way of fulfilling these tasks. Needless to say, these tasks took him far wide to all 4 corners of the earth. Speaking to all 4 corners of the earth, guess who he bumped into while he was on this quest? He bumped into this guy chained to a mountain, whose name was Prometheus. Anybody remember Prometheus? Guy chained to a rock, edge of the earth, getting his liver pecked out by an eagle every day, grows back every night? That Prometheus. So not only did Prometheus get his first visitor in ages and ages and ages, but during the course of his travels, Heracles did something amazing. He killed the eagle. Wow. So let's go back to this deal that Zeus had made with Prometheus. Someone must kill the eagle. Well, let's check that one off the list. This is half fulfilled. Prometheus sees the end in sight, even as the eagle continues to peck away at his liver. Okay, what about job number 2? Somebody must take Prometheus's place. Well, amazingly enough, Heracles would help that happen as well. And this is how that happened. During the course of his travels, Hercules got tired, so he went to go visit his friend Chiron, the centaur, spend an evening with his old friend, kick back a few brewskis, talk about old times. Well, Chiron brought out his special secret ale. And if you know anything about centaurs, you know that their ale is the strongest ale in the world. And not only that, but centaurs, when they get drunk, they don't get funny drunk. They get ugly drunk. And so Chiron and all his centaur friends were carousing with Heracles, drinking one more ale and one more ale. And before you know it, somebody brought up politics and a huge fight broke out. And everybody was after everybody else. And unfortunately, during this huge fight that occurred, something tragic happened. Heracles accidentally shot his friend Chiron with a poison arrow. Don't you hate when that happens? Now, Chiron, of course, was immortal, so he couldn't die, but he could feel pain, and so he was going to look forward to an eternity of excruciating pain for the rest of his life. Chiron could not deal with this possibility. So this is what Chiron did. He went up to Zeus, the king of the gods, and he said, Zeus, you are more powerful than any god. Would you please grant me the right to die? And if you do that, in exchange for that, I will actually, in my dying days, volunteer to take the place of Prometheus up on Mount Caucasus. And Zeus took pity on Chiron and said, yes, I will grant your wish. So going back up to the mountain and Prometheus, not only did somebody kill the eagle, but somebody took Prometheus's place. So both checklist items were fulfilled. Prometheus was set free. Chiron was allowed to die. And Zeus was so taken by Chiron's huge sacrifice that he decided to memorialize Chiron. And what he did is he painted his picture among the stars. And Chiron is remembered today as Sagittarius, the centaur, one of the 12 signs of the zodiac. Now, if you remember at the very beginning of my story, I talked about how all these Greek myths started as stories and pictures in the sky. So we now come full circle, and you can see how these stories became pictures in the sky. So for those of you who happen to practice it and read your astrology every day, there are 12 signs of the zodiac that are based on constellations up in the sky. And I talked about how Sagittarius is based on the story of Chiron the centaur. Several other of these zodiac stories are similarly based on the myths that I just shared with you. For instance, you have Libra, the scales. she memorializes Themis, the goddess of justice, who revealed the prophecy to Zeus. He liked her so much for doing this that he immortalized her picture in the stars. In addition to Libra, you have Capricorn, the goat. And you say, Russell, I don't remember you talking about a goat. Well, let's go back to the story of Zeus when he was being raised in secret. He was nourished by the milk of Amalthea, the goat. And so Zeus always remembered that. And so he immortalized Capricorn as the goat. You have Taurus, the bull. Well, that marks one of Zeus's trysts when he seduced Europa disguised as a bull. He must have been particularly fond of this myth because he decided that this was the picture he wanted to remember. Okay? And in addition to Taurus, you have the story of Leo the lion, a good summer constellation. That is based on Heracles' 12 tasks as labor number 1 when he was supposed to slay the Nemean lion. Zeus was so impressed by the bravery of both Heracles and this powerful lion that he decided to immortalize the lion as a picture up in the sky. Well, what happened to Heracles? Heracles has an amazing story himself. Don't forget that he was actually the son of Zeus. And when Heracles finally died, as all mortals do, he was accorded an honor that had never before been granted to any mortal. Zeus sent down a royal chariot to escort Heracles up to Mount Olympus, where he was granted immortality and made into a god. Isn't that wonderful? So these are some of the myths that I want to share with you today. And you can see how these myths were important for lessons for mankind. In fact, for mothers telling their children. You can imagine a mother telling her child, Allie, stop playing with fire. If you play with fire anymore, Zeus is going to send you to Hades for all eternity and chain you to a rock and have an eagle peck away at your liver. And Allie says, okay, yes, Mom, I'm not going to play with fire anymore. Or somebody else says, well, you know, Neville, it's your turn to clean out the stables. If you do it in one day, maybe Zeus will make you immortal and turn you into a god. And little Neville says, okay, Daddy, I'll get right on that right away. Let me go clean out the stables. So you can see how these get passed down and become wonderful stories. So Heracles, in addition to become a god, he was made immortal, again, as a picture in the sky of stars. And again, that is just one of many, many, many stories in Greek mythology. There were hundreds of them. I don't have time to tell any more today, but I urge you to go to the library or read books and learn more about these stories, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Jason and the Golden Fleece. They are just amazing stories. And who knows, maybe one of these days, you and I will meet back aboard ship and we'll be able to have a lecture where we can share some more of these stories. But for now, this is my lecture on gods, heroes, and monsters, thrilling tales of Greek mythology. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to turn over and spend some time with Q&A. So let me close down a couple of things here and make sure that we're set. Okay, so I got my glasses on. Let's see what we've got coming in on the question line. Okay, my apologies if I mispronounce your name. Prakruti in Boston says, I just finished reading Circe, so I want to get a deeper knowledge on this subject. Well, hopefully my telling us some more of these Greek myths helped enhance your feeling of the culture in which these people lived and where some of these stories came from. So let me just double check that I've got everything taken care of here. Okay, yeah, I've got everything taken care of here. Okay, so yeah, Circe is one of the myths that I did not get a chance to tell today. Circe was one of the children of Helios, the sun god, and she's featured in the Homer epic called the Odyssey, where Odysseus is journeying around the Greek area and he comes upon the island where Circe, an enchantress, is seducing men and turning them into animals. And the book that Circe, that Prakruti is referring to, is a modern retelling of this story. And what's interesting is it's told from the point of view of Circe as the good guy, not the bad guy. And that actually leads into another question from Robert. who asked before, what in ancient Greek mythology survives today as a current belief or folklore? So you have these stories constantly being retold and reinterpreted for a new age. A lot of things like Eros or Oedipus complex or things like that are universal Greek themes that live on today. Anybody can tell these stories. They're constantly getting rewritten and retold. One of my favorites is an old Greek myth called Pygmalion, about a sculptor who creates a perfect statue of a woman and unfortunately falls in love with her and is cursed for the rest of his life because he's basically in love with a statue who is lifeless and can never love him back. George Bernard Shaw took that theme, turned it into a play, and that play was turned into a musical, and the musical is called My Fair Lady, about a linguist who takes a woman from the gutter, teaches her how to be a lady, and then falls in love with her. It's the same theme. It's a wonderful theme. So you see these things resonating all through. I see some people giving me some wonderful compliments. Noel says, hope to see you aboard a Viking cruise. I hope so too. As you can see, Viking cruises are restarting in just a couple of months. And so fingers crossed, it's just a matter of time before we're all going to see each other on ships again. Okay, so let's see what else we have. Jeremy in San Jose says, you're never babbling, Russell. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Although my wife, Gail, who is my partner in lecturing and running workshops, you will not see her today. She's actually right off camera doing everything that takes place behind the scenes. She's the one who constantly holds up a sign that says, Russell, talk slower. So you have her to thank if you understood a word I said today. Okay. Diane says, I love your presentations. Thank you. Scott in Grapevine says, before I retired, I taught this stuff. Isn't that wonderful? Okay. So what does Linda say? Linda in Roanoke says, I've always enjoyed the Odyssey and was very amused when the modern version of the story came out as Oh Brother, We're Out There with George Clooney. Yes, that is a wonderful story by the Coen brothers, who took the story of the Odyssey and actually updated it into the old root music's time. And you actually see a lot of themes. As I mentioned, Odysseus is traveling aimlessly around, taking 7 years to get home, just as these characters travel through the deep South in the early, I think it's 1920s or 1930s, the Depression era, and they encounter adventures very similar. They get seduced by sirens. They meet a one-eyed monster that is like the Cyclops. It's a wonderful movie if you get a chance to see it. Okay. Arthur in Tucson says, I thought Zeus was born in a cave on Crete. Again, there are many different versions of these stories. I don't think I actually said where Zeus was born. I do know that he was hidden from his father during his entire birth and childhood. And so that's possibly where he was hidden, was on the island of Crete, while his mother gave a rock to the father and had him swallow that. Okay, Nancy says, I'm thrilled to hear some of the Greek mythology. Some wonderful people saying, I love your presentation. This is great. Again, it is wonderful to know that as I'm babbling out into cyberspace, that people at your end are appreciating it. I hope you're all sitting there in your comfiest chair with your favorite drink or refreshment and pretending that we're all together in the theater or the Explorer's Lounge. It's a shame we're not together in person on the ship. But the wonderful thing is that we get a more intimate one-on-one conversation with each other this way, and you get to be a lot more relaxed. I get to take my time, even though I get carried away and talk so much. So, okay. So draw connections between Roman and Greek gods. Can you link them also to the Nordic gods, or are their parallels not so obvious? Let me talk a little bit about that. Greek gods were basically incorporated as Roman gods. And the reason why is because the Roman Empire conquered Greece. And one interesting thing is about the Romans is they did not think they were the best be-all and end-all to everything. If they saw a better idea from a culture they took over, they assimilated that. And the Greeks had this wonderful mythology that the Romans did not have. And so the Romans took that mythology and started adapting the names to the Roman gods, and the stories became Roman stories. For instance, Zeus became Jupiter. Eros became the Greek god of love, Cupid, things like that. Heracles, as I mentioned, became Hercules. And that is somewhat, though not directly related to Norse mythology. Norse mythology also had its head god Odin. It had a god of thunder, Thor, who was not the head god. But the reason that these two started intermingling was because of Britain. Britain was once part of the Roman Empire, but then Britain was invaded by the Vikings. And so a lot of British folklore became this weird mishmash of Norse mythology as well as Roman mythology, which came from Greek mythology. And the best way to see that is a lot of things that we have in today's culture, including the days of the week. The days of the week had old Roman names taken from Greek names, like, for instance, Tuesday used to be called Mars Day. Um, and Saturday was called Saturn's Day. Those are Greek gods based on the old Roman gods. And yet at the same time, you have other things like Wednesday is taken from Woden's Day, which is the Old English for Woden or Odin. You have Thursday was taken from Thor's Day, who is Thor, the Norse god of thunder, and Friday was taken from Freya, or Freda, who was Thor's mother. And so you have this weird mishmash in our culture of Norse mythology and Roman mythology and Greek mythology. Okay, so when I was in Delphi, this is Joan at Tinton Falls. When I was in Delphi, I learned that the goddess of Delphi probably got her powers from the ether that came out of the ground. Again, another version of the story. I'm not saying that Omphalos, the stone, was the source of the power of prophecy. I'm saying that Omphalos was the foundation for the temple of the Oracle of Delphi. It was like the building block stone. Again, that is just one version of the story. Okay, did any of the Greek mythological figures represent that the earth revolves around the sun? Offhand, unfortunately, I don't quite know the answer to that. I do know that in the original Greek mythology, they did subscribe to the theory that the sun revolved around the earth. I mentioned before the god Helios, who in his chariot of fire would circle the earth every day. Now, what I did not mention is that all of this was from 700 through 500 or so BC. Once you passed into the Common Era, a lot of Greek mythology was taken over by the logical minds of the philosophers, the scientists, Aristotle, people like that. And they started consigning Greek mythology to tall tales and myths and let science take over. And so it's not as if the Greeks all through their culture believed that myths were true. They did get to a point that they believed that they were stories. And that's where you get some of the later Greek thinkers thinking of the possibility that possibly the earth revolved around the sun. But as far as I know, during the days of the original old Greek mythology, they believed that the sun revolved around the earth. Okay. Elva in Arlington says, have you read Stephen Fry's book Mythos? And if yes, do you have an opinion about it? Unfortunately, I have not read that book, but again, there are many, many books. I'm more familiar with the Joseph Campbell books on mythology, where he goes through and he talks about how myths tend to have these common ancestors, story of floods, stories of sons betraying their fathers. I mentioned, unfortunately, the story of for some reason, fixation that women are the ones who introduced sin and evil into the world. I'm not sure if Stephen Fry's book Mythos is like that. I'll be happy to check it out. So thank you very much for the clue, Elva. Okay, did the mythology act as a religion of the people? Hey, that's a very interesting question, Craig in San Diego. Back in the days when the Greeks, and I'm talking about the times of Homer and Hesiod, heard these myths, they were told as history as well as mythology. To us today, when we interpret the term mythology, it is widely interpreted as story or ancient story. To the ancient Greeks, mythology was history. This was the way things were. They believed that this is what actually happened because they were stories told by the elders to the children, just as any story was told of a great hero or of the king who just died or of what your Aunt Mildred did. So these stories were indistinguishable. They were not regarded as true or false. They were just what your culture was built on. So they were regarded pretty much as true until later time passed. And as I mentioned, some of the philosophers started to question that. Okay. So, Bill in Windsor asked, who was considered the creator of the various myths, scholars, religious leaders, philosophers, etc. I mentioned that the way they come down to us is largely through writers like Homer and Hesiod and Apollodorus. As far as who actually told them, that is hugely open to debate. It could have been storytellers like Homer. We do know that the Iliad and the Odyssey were just two books out of like an 11 book series that hold this whole massive mythology that unfortunately is lost to time. So we do know that there were bards and storytellers whose job it was to memorize these long stories, go around from town to town through ancient Greece and just tell them so that they would be passed on. And they were actually memorized word for word before they were written down. So a lot of the storytelling in myths came from that storytelling tradition. Let's see, what else do we have? A wonderful compliment from Roxana. Thank you very much for that. Similarly from Kermit. Yes, Lorraine makes a comment that a lot of Greek mythology has been passed down to Roman mythology, and a lot of it has also been brought down into Judeo-Christian mythologies. That's a wonderful statement. Again, a lot of these are archetypes. A lot of Greek mythology came from Babylonian stories. Babylonian stories had stories of a great flood, just as Judeo-Christian mythologies have stories of a great flood. I will tell you, if you ever get a chance, and I hope you do, to go back on a Viking cruise and listen to more of my lectures. I've got some wonderful lectures on Norse mythology. I've got a wonderful lecture on dragons that talks about the similarities of cultures, including Judeo-Christian mythology and other mythologies that share some of these wonderful archetypes. Okay. Do any remnants of Greek mythology still exist in Greek culture of today? This is from Jacqueline in Phoenix. Again, yes, it is undoubtedly part of their culture. You still can go to Greece today, as I hope you do when you visit during one of the itineraries, and you can see the remains of the Oracle of Delphi, the Temple of Athena. You can see Mount Olympus. It is an actual place. Mount Caucasus are actually places, and they believed, for instance, the volcano Etna was seen as the furnace of Hephaestus, the god who created man. So you can't help but have these things live on. These are what the Greeks actually believe happened in the Aegean Sea, in the Adriatic Sea. There are monuments, there are temples, there are landmarks, and those are still part of Greek culture. You can look at that and you can say, okay, this is the story supposedly of how Etna became a volcano. You can believe that as myth. You can believe that as history. It all depends on the point of view you want to take. Okay, so Finsa, thank you. Finsa actually says that she and Charlie made it into my lecture. Thank you. I was happy to do the shout out to you, Finsa and Charlie. I hope you're well. Okay, how were the Greek gods worshipped? The Greek gods were worshipped just like any gods were worshipped by early people through sacrifice. Through sacrifice. You would build temples to them. You would sacrifice fruits, harvest, things like that. Occasionally, unfortunately, you would sacrifice humans to them. There were old stories of, my apologies, virgins being sacrificed at various temples to Apollo, things like that. There are also stories of virgins being dedicated to sit in at the temple of Apollo and maintain the place. So yes, these gods were worshipped, they were prayed to, they were bribed, they were begged of. There are constant stories of people on one side of a battle making sacrifices to the gods, praying to the gods in the hope that the gods would sway the war in their favor. Okay, so I keep losing my place as we keep scrolling through. Okay, Linda at Roanoke again says, I've never heard these stories told in such detail before. Thank you. I apologize that I did not have time to tell more. There are many, many wonderful stories. And again, hopefully we'll get a chance to tell some more. So let's see. Okay, a lot of wonderful, wonderful comments. And Noel says, it would be great. Hope to see you aboard a Viking cruise. I hope to see you as well, Noel. Anybody online, if and when I see you on a Viking cruise, please be sure to come up and introduce yourselves to us. Gail and I love being on these ships. Our purpose there is to just enhance your cruise. So I will tell you now, we are always accessible. We are always interruptible. We are happy to meet up with you for drinks, for a walk, for dinner, for a meal, and just chat with you. We love doing what we do, and I hope that comes across in just the whole presentation today. Lisa in Balthell says, great job, Gail. Yes, I also want to thank my wife, Gail, who is the reason that I look good now, that I've got this wonderful backdrop behind me, that I'm not sitting in total darkness. So thank you very much. Okay, so on that happy note, I think we are out of questions. I loved your feedback. I love your comments. I'm fortunate that I didn't get a whole lot of corrections, but if nothing else, hopefully you know more about Greek mythology and culture than you did before. And hopefully when you go to Greece, visiting these places will mean a little bit more to you. Okay, so for now, it's just a matter of time before we're all back on ship again. I do urge you, keep sending your comments, your questions, your suggestions to Viking through this or through other Q&A sessions on Viking.TV. I can attest that these comments are not only read by me, they are read by up to the highest executive levels of Viking. I know that for a fact. It is because of suggestions that I've been invited to be back here again to spend a little bit of time with you. So until we meet back again aboard ship, please take care, please stay healthy, and as Karina loves to say, bye for now.